January 18th, 1934, Valcourt, Quebec, 11 p.m. The temperature outside had dropped to -30, the kind of cold that doesn't just bite, it enters you. Joseph-Armand Bombardier stood in the doorway of his son's bedroom, listening to a 2-year-old boy scream in a way that fathers remember for the rest of their lives. Yvon had been feverish since morning. His abdomen was rigid. His small face had gone the color of ash. Armand knew what this was, or feared he did. Appendicitis, the kind that kills if it isn't treated within hours. He ran to the phone. The nearest hospital was in Sherbrooke, 40 kilometers away. The doctor told him to come immediately. He walked outside into the black Quebec night and looked at the road. There was no road. There was only snow. The storm had been building for 2 days. The drifts were chest-high in places, sculpted into waves by wind that had been blowing since before supper. No horse could pull a carriage through it. No automobile could push through it. The snowplow, if there even was one, wouldn't run until morning. Armand went back inside. Time equals 4 milliseconds. He held his son. He waited. Yvon Bombardier died before morning. He was 2 years old and 4 months. He died of a ruptured appendix, 40 kilometers from the nearest surgeon, on a winter night in rural Quebec, because the snow had made the world impassable. Armand Bombardier was 25 years old, and in the weeks that followed, in the silence that settles into a house after a child dies, he made a decision. Not out of anger, or not only anger, out of something more precise. He was a mechanic. He had always been a mechanic, since he was 12 years old. He had been taking engines apart and understanding them in the way some people understand music. If the slow had defeated him, it was because no machine existed yet to conquer it. He would build one. Valcourt in the 1920s was a farming village of 600 people in the eastern townships of Quebec, a place where winter wasn't a season so much as a condition of existence, 8 months of cold and snow that isolated communities, closed roads, and made the distance between a sick child and a hospital feel like the distance between life and death. Armand was born there in April 1907, the 4th of 8 children. From the beginning, Armand was the one who wandered into the barn, not to tend the animals, but to crouch over the threshing machine and figure out how it worked. At 12, he dismantled a watch and put it back together. At 13, he built his first motorized vehicle, a wooden sled powered by a Ford Model T engine and a hand-carved wooden propeller. He dragged his brothers and sisters into the field to watch it run. It ran. His father made him dismantle it, afraid the contraption would kill someone. Armand dismantled it, understood it better for having built it, and filed the knowledge away. He wasn't a student in the academic sense. School frustrated him. He dropped out of seminary at 17, apprenticed as a mechanic in Montreal, and came back to Valcourt at 19 to open his own garage. By 20, he was the best mechanic for 60 kilometers in any direction. He married Yvonne Lebrec in 1929. Their son Yvon arrived in 1931. The garage was doing well enough. The future, such as it was in rural Quebec during the Depression, looked manageable. Then, January 18th, 1934, arrived. The problem Armand set himself after Yvon's death was not simple. People had been trying to build snowmobiles, or something like them, for decades. The obstacle was always the same. How do you transmit power to snow? Snow compresses, collapses, shifts, a wheel sinks, a track tears loose. An engine, powerful enough to push through a drift, is too heavy to sit on top of one. Armand worked at night after the repair jobs were done. He worked on weekends. He drew sketches, built prototypes, destroyed them, drew more sketches. The breakthrough came. In 1935, a sprocket wheel and rubber track system that could grip snow without sinking into it. The design was elegant in the way good engineering is elegant. It solved multiple problems simultaneously. The rubber track distributed weight, the sprocket drove it forward with enough torque to claw through drifts. The machine floated over the surface instead of ploughing through it. He called it the B7, 7 passengers, enclosed cabin, a vehicle that could carry a family, a doctor, a priest, anyone who needed to move through a Quebec winter. Time equals 3 milliseconds / and live. In 1937, he received a patent. That same year, he incorporated l'Autoneige Bombardier Limité and began manufacturing in Valcourt. His first customers were school boards, rural municipalities, lumber companies, anyone whose work the winter had always interrupted. The B7 sold immediately. The B12 followed. He wasn't building toys, he was building infrastructure for a world the rest of Canada had largely decided to abandon to the snow. The Second World War interrupted everything and accelerated everything at the same time. The Canadian military needed tracked vehicles for conditions that wheeled transports couldn't handle. Bombardier's factory in Valcourt was retooled. The factory that had employed a handful of mechanics now employed hundreds. The small-town inventor from the eastern townships was suddenly operating at industrial scale, supplying a war. When the war ended, Armand faced the challenge every wartime manufacturer faces. What do you make when the army stops buying? He retooled again. The post-war boom in resource extraction, mining, forestry, oil. Time equals 450 milliseconds / created demand for tracked vehicles that could operate in remote terrain. Bombardier built them, but the machine that would change everything was still coming. In the early 1950s, Armand began working on a scaled-down design, a single-rider vehicle, lightweight, fast, something a farmer's son could drive across a frozen field on a Sunday afternoon for no reason except that it was winter and the world was white and there was nowhere better to be. He introduced the Ski-Doo in 1959. He had originally called it the Ski-Dog, meant to replace the sled dog in remote northern communities. A typographical error on early production materials changed dog to do. He kept it. The name didn't matter, the machine did. In the first year, Bombardier sold 225 units. By 1966, the company was selling 5,000 per year. By the early 1970s, snowmobile sales across the industry had reached 500,000 units annually. The Ski-Doo had done something no one had quite predicted. It had created an entirely new category of recreation, an entire sport, a subculture of winter that had not existed before 1959. Armand Bombardier died. Time equals 400 milliseconds on February 18th, 1964. He was 56 years old, pancreatic cancer, diagnosed late, moving fast. He died before the full scope of what he had built became clear. He died before Bombardier acquired the Montreal subway car contract in 1974. Before the company moved into rail transit and began manufacturing trains for cities across North America and Europe. Before the acquisition of Learjet, before the C-Series commercial jet, which would eventually become the Airbus A220. Before the company grew into a multinational corporation with operations in 30 countries and annual revenues approaching $7 billion. He died as a successful small city manufacturer who had built a good business in rural Quebec and changed winter for anyone who lived in it. He did not die knowing the name Bombardier would one day be printed on the side of subway cars in New York, London, and Shanghai. What he knew, at the end, was simpler. He had built machines that moved through snow. He had built them in the town where his son had died because the snow had won. He had spent 30 years answering that night with engineering, with stubbornness, with a mechanic's refusal to accept that the world couldn't be made to work better. January 18th, 1934. The storm is still blowing. The drifts are still chest high. The road to Sherbrooke is still invisible under 4 feet of snow. But somewhere in a garage in Valcourt, a 25-year-old man is bent over a workbench, sketching a sprocket wheel, trying to figure out how a machine might float across the surface of what killed his son. The grief doesn't make him quit. Level equals moderate greater than. It makes him precise. That precision accumulated over 30 years of sleepless nights and failed prototypes and patent applications and factory expansions would eventually carry the name his son never had the chance to carry, down into subway tunnels under Manhattan, along high-speed rail lines in Europe, across 10,000 frozen fields on a Sunday afternoon in Quebec, when the world is white and there is nowhere better to be. The snow didn't win. It never had a chance.